course, without further ado, let me hand over to Reese. Reese, go ahead.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Reese. Most of you probably already know me, but I do character design, creature design, environmental design. Right now, a lot of art direction. And I thought it would be really interesting to present some of a little bit of my process. A lot of it has been taking in a lot of AI consideration. Please excuse my cats who just decided to have the zoomies right when we start. But yeah, so a lot of my process consists of having to get a lot of images out really quick. And this is something that AI has given me a lot of opportunity to really like grab the handles of. So I've been able to create like multiple sketches that have value and detail in probably like half the time. And I thought it'd be something really interesting to share. I also thought it would be good to kind of talk a little bit about AI at the beginning. I know that there is a little bit of a stigma to it. A lot of artists feel very, I would say when I started, I felt very scared of it. But I've grown to accept it, and I know where it's okay and where it can get into a little bit of like a copyright area. And I'm kind of going to go in a little bit of that. Yeah. Pretty much I'm going to be just what I call sketching with AI. So what I'm going to be showing you, my process is going from research, using a lot of keywords and stuff like that to create images that I have in the back of my mind. A lot of how I paint is kind of like throwing paint on canvas. So I don't typically thumbnail. My thumbnailing is gathering information and stuff like that and getting a picture in my head like, ooh, that might be kind of cool. So going at this, I knew that I wanted to create kind of an homage to an old piece I did, which was this dragon, koi fish, cobra thing I did a long time ago. And I knew I wanted to revitalize that. So I kind of was in my mind, I wanted to do, poison, dragon, a little bit of gold. That was kind of my first thoughts going in. So to start off, what is AI? I know pretty much everybody knows what AI is, but at this point, artificial intelligence system uses a pool of millions of images categorized by keywords, separated in groups based off popular wording. I like to picture it like a neural network. So it finds images and it matches keywords that creates pathways. So if you know what a neural network is, it's like these areas where a lot of popular imagery is. And what it does is it branches to these images that have these keywords, and the more popular the image, the more abundant it is, it'll reference those, and it creates an image gathering all these little points, these neurons. More details in the wording, of course, creates a more detailed image. The problem is if you're using keywords that are not typically popular, something that you would, if you looked up on Instagram, would be like a keyword that only has like 1,000 tweets or something, something like that. Those ones won't come out as clear. So sometimes you have to take that in consideration when generating images. What's really nice is it can blend techniques. It can use different styles while creating mood and atmosphere. So like I wanted, let's say, Jurassic Park, but I wanted it to be more cartoony, but I want to keep that kind of scariness. AI can kind of give me a little picture of that. So kind of things to consider when using AI generated art. This is kind of like the cons and some things that you should really keep in mind. This is at least stuff that I kind of hold myself to when I'm using AI generation, because I don't want to steal from other artists. I don't want to use other artists. So like when I go and look at AI, I look at it as the same thing if I'm going to like textures.com and pulling up photos and stuff like that, photo references. And that's something that AI has given me opportunity is I can find something really specific that I want. In the images I'm showing here, I did do a little bit of photo bashing, but I try to keep it all AI. But I will also use textures.com. But when it's something really obtuse, AI can come in handy with that. So AI generators, they use millions of images. Sadly, most of which are copyrighted material and are other artworks without permission to use. This does sound really bad, especially because you're like, people can make money off my artwork. The thing is, AI generators, they're technically non-profit. So the money that they make from it is supposed to support the servers and stuff like that. And this is from, I'm not a professional in this, so there might be some people that can actually get a little more information about something like this. But reading through a lot of the copyright stuff, it is not trying to be a system where people can just buy the image. And you're allowing like Midjourney and stuff like that are kind of like leasing the image to you. So that's something to take into consideration. It can really recreate images using name of artists and their style to create completely new art pieces. Some of this, like, it could be like one that I've seen, if you look on the front pages of any AI generated artwork stuff, is like in the style of James Jean or whatever his name was, and or like Kim Jong-gi, and people are generating a lot of those artworks. So that's something that's a little iffy. It's also not 100% accurate. Can create really strange and unusual images. It's still in the beginnings of it, but every single day it's improving. It's getting a lot more accurate. AI generated artwork can also cannot be copyrighted. It's not created by a human and is considered copyright by the author of the program. There is an actual paragraph that talks about this. So copyright.gov actually did a little bit of talking about it. They're still in the works of figuring out how copyright and AI will work. So since it's created by a robot, you can't really like claim that art piece, even though you generated the keywords for it and everything like that. It's still considered under the rights of the people who created it. So, i.e., Dalle, Midjourney, stuff like that. So there is a little bit of a good thing about this because we'll get to that. So avoid in the style of, this is something I hold myself to. I try to really avoid in the style of an artist name. Sometimes I'll try to reference things like, if we're like, we really want a game and we want it to feel like it's in the 20s or the 30s, I would try to get that old retro style. Let's say we're trying to get a retro futuristic, like the Jetsons. That's something that I would use like when I'm studying. I would use a lot of that stuff, but I try to avoid whenever I use an artist's name because it's just going to rip the style from that. A lot of these AI generated pieces that you see posted where it's completely 100% AI and it looks super, super accurate is because they will take artists' names and blend artists together, and they're taking almost complete images and just utilizing kind of the bank of a lot of images to recreate that. So you will get some images that look absolutely incredible, but usually they always have like a name tied to it. When you don't use a name, it's going to use just the bulk. So you're less likely to steal from someone if you don't use inspired by or in the style of this kind of artist. And there's some ways to avoid, using other people's artists or other people's artwork while using in the style of, if you use like a whole bunch of different artists, but you have to keep that in mind. The last part is, and this is kind of going back to the other thing, you can take down images. What's really nice about a lot of these programs, especially Midjourney, that's why I like Midjourney, is you can go into their database and it's all public. So you can actually go and find me and you can see all the stuff I generated. You can look up every single keyword I used. And what's really nice is if you have someone who's like selling an image and you're like, wow, that looks a lot like mine, you are able to actually go to Midjourney, contact them and be like, hey, I'm pretty sure this is in the style of my thing. I don't like this. And they will take it down for you. And the person can fight as much as they want, but technically Midjourney owns the copyright. And I'm pretty sure Dalle and them have a lot of situations like this. The other thing is there's a lot of AI programs that are coming out that are avoiding this. I like to stick with Midjourney and Dalle and everything like that because they regulate everything that goes through, like all the images and stuff like that. You're not going to get like, smut, which is, something you really want to avoid. So you're not going to get a lot of that stuff. But there are other programs, but right now that stuff is in the works of getting regulated. There's talks about it. So it's all really new. But kind of getting away from the problems with AI and how I utilize it, we'll get kind of into my process. So to start, I kind of talked about it a little bit. The generators use Midjourney. I really like it because it creates more abstract work. It has nicer colors. Compositions are really nice. It seems like it takes a database of art pieces. It understands golden ratio a little bit better. It databases all generations. I kind of see this also as a con because if you're working with a gaming company, you're going to have to purchase private, so people can't just like go in and like take your image and then pretty much use it for whatever they want. So some of that can be a little weird, but that's also a whole business thing. Unlike everybody else who's just using it to generate, like a business has their own private profile and they have to pay like a pretty big sum to use that, I think, for a year or two. Also, it's missing a lot of keywords and more inaccurate. Like I said before, there's sometimes where you'll find something that you really want to generate, but it's like it just can't find the image, or it'll pull something completely different. So Dalle's really cool. I find it to be really favorable toward graphic design. It likes to pull photographs. It seems everything looks a little more photorealistic. Just staring. And but also I find that it really messes up anatomy. I think out of a lot of them, Dalle is the one that like really fails at like getting hands right and stuff like that. So it requires a lot of paint over when you're doing things like that. One that a lot of people don't know is Artbreeder. This one's been around for quite a while. It was originally designed for portraits, but they have a really cool thing called a character designer, where they actually make like silhouettes of characters, which I'll show in another frame. Cons, it's incredibly inaccurate. You'll see like some of the characters just look bad, but I'm using it for the silhouette. I like the shapes, sometimes it's really nice just kind of generating a bunch of things and getting ideas. And the last one, Stable Diffusion. This one, you're going to get probably the best images. I don't use this because it requires you to actually use your computer to generate, and it takes a lot of power, a lot of electricity. It's like pretty much like, when people like generate NFTs, they have to have those big databases and stuff like that. That's why like when you go to Midjourney and stuff, they charge to do faster stuff. But Stable Diffusion, you download it, use it to your computer. The thing is, a lot of people can do a lot of coding. Like I've seen some people put it into Photoshop and they'll literally paint and it'll generate what you paint. It's kind of cool. So Midjourney, this is some stuff that I generated. I kind of wanted to include like stuff that I wouldn't use, stuff that I would use. Far left, I wouldn't use. Kind of feels a little bit too finished. It looks like someone's art piece, and that's something I would avoid. It's really nice reference. Like if I ever wanted to like, oh man, I wonder how some neon lighting would work and stuff like that, I would use the image, not like photobash it, but just have it like in my mind, The middle one, this is something I would definitely use a lot more of. When I was generating this one, I was trying to get a person holding a staff. I don't know where all the rocks came from. I don't know where the setting came from. I don't know what they're holding. It looks like a pickaxe, but I see like a really nice shape in that staff on the top, which is something I would like take out and put onto like, let's say a weapon or something, which I actually did, I think. Really, really good with landscapes. There is a crap ton of landscape photos. So like you can generate everything in the background. So it's really nice. Like I really like the mountains on the top right. Like let's see my mouse right here, the top right mountain up there. I can pull that out and put it in one of my paintings to get the shape of, recolor it, stuff like that. I also wanted to include like the weirdness. You can see what is it? King Louis or whatever. He's got two torsos. Like Midjourney does that sometimes. But the stuff that I really love about Midjourney is the textures it creates. The bottom right, like those crystals and everything like that. It's using like a database of a whole bunch of crystals. So it's something like, a person's not gonna be like, hey, I took that picture of that crystal. So it's like using those chunks, but mostly textures. That's what I'm aiming for when I'm using a lot of like Midjourney and stuff like that. That's why I kind of avoid like Dalle, which Dalle can be really interesting. Like I typed in a T-Rex riding roller skates, and it's a toy, and it created it, which is really cool. You can tell it's AI, but it also it's almost photorealistic. Like you'd be like, oh, that's an actual. And Dalle can do this really well. That's why I say it's really great for graphic design, because they're like, I want Albert Einstein riding a skateboard. It'll give you that, in the style of, and it does that stuff really accurately. But as far as when it comes to like photobashing and using textures, it's very minimal. I don't find it really useful. Like you can see in the top right image, I was like, I want a road made out of piano keys. And it just couldn't figure it out. And it looks really ugly. And that happens a lot more often than something like with Midjourney. Also the bottom middle image, the dragon, like it looks like a photograph. It's crazy. So that might be nice if you really want to, like, I like his cheekbone. I might use that little like round metal shape, So going back to Artbreeder, what's interesting about Artbreeder is the character design one, like you can see on the left, like her arms are janky. I think she has like 3 arms, one's up, one's down. But what I really liked was like, oh, her waist and hips are really cool. I like that shape. I like her hands hanging down there. I can put like a weapon in there. Her hands kind of up. Maybe I can have a staff. So I was like, okay, this pose is pretty good. How it works is it uses a parent system. So there's like a whole bunch of images that they rely on the community to upload the images. And they'll take like a character and match it with another character and create another character with it. So it'll take like clothes or the body of one, and then like it fuses them together, and you can actually see like the lineage of the image that I created. And then once you like find like a character that you like, you can tweak it, like add coats or add a helmet or make them look more feminine, masculine. There's like a whole bunch of sliders. But the thing is, like, you do it by 2 points, it'll change. But if you do it by like 10 points, suddenly their head pops off. Really ugly. But when it comes to like, I'm looking for the silhouette, like I'll take that image, oops, and I will like take out the opacity almost completely. And this is where I implement a lot of Midjourney. So I'm like, I like her a lot. I want her to look like a druid. Right now, she kind of looks a little bit like a hunter. So I like, wow, I'd add some flowers to her hair. I wanted a lot more flowy. So I generated some images of hair like that. And then I was like, I really want flowy fabric. Midjourney is fantastic with fabric because fabric is really like everywhere. So I was like, I want a very lacy fabric. So I generated a whole bunch of pictures like with that. And then I was like, okay, this is where I want the staff. And so I had it generate a bunch of random staffs for me. And then I kind of put it all together. And then I lower the opacity and then I draw on it. I don't rely on the images too much. I just kind of like, when you like look at an art piece and you squint and you're trying to find the shapes, I'm focusing on those shapes. So like really low opacity, a lot of it's really mucky. I actually like the mucky because then I can be a little abstract with my shapes and stuff like that, figuring out the armor. And so this is kind of like what I would maybe like right before I send to a client, like, hey, I generate maybe like 20 of these because it's so quick. And they'll be like, I really like her shape. I really like this. Can you refine this one a little bit more? So that's kind of really nice when it comes to character sketches. Now kind of focusing on Midjourney specifically, these are keywords that I try to utilize a lot of. It helps me figure out like mood, colors, everything like that. I do a lot of color change when I take it into Procreate. Procreate's the program that I use completely. It's pretty much like dumbed down Photoshop. So a lot of the terms that I'm going to be using, Photoshop has as well. So dappled light, golden hour, these ones, it's just really powerful, strong red lighting, really warm. Window light, also Dino Edition. I like dinosaurs. So the keywords literally are either Jurassic Park dappled light or Jurassic Park golden hour, dinosaur window light. So really simple. Limited palette's really fantastic. That's a kind of a term that's used with a lot of old oil painters. So you might get a little more of an oil painting feeling for it. Atmospheric perspective, definitely going to be very like dynamic. Monochromatic is nice if I'm really not wanting to focus too much on the colors, but I want to focus more on the values, but I still want to have a little bit of color. Overcast, if I'm really trying to lower the mood. Luminous light, kind of like if you're trying to do like glowing mushrooms and stuff, is really fantastic. These ones are the fun ones. Neon light speaks for itself. You're of course going to get a lot of that Miami Vice neon. You're also going to get a lot of cyberpunk. Yeah. So sorry, I was reading Discord. Motion blur. That one's also a really fantastic one. I like motion blur because if I'm like doing a scene where someone's getting chased or something like that, I can generate a bunch of things with motion blur and just find the shapes that I like. And that's really cool because it's blurred out. So you're like, oh, I don't really have to worry about editing the image too much. Transmitted light. This one's really cool because it doesn't show it too well in the image. When it was blown up, it showed a lot better. But transmitted light is like the light poking through an object. Like when you're looking at your fingers, you put like a flashlight and it turns pink, you can see through your fingers, or with a leaf, when you shine a flashlight through, you can see the light coming through it. That's kind of like what that transmitted light is. Really nice if you're wanting to do something like wings, or like if zombies are really cool. If you use a transmitted light, you can actually like see through the flesh. It's kind of creepy. Personal favorite, fog machine. This one's really cool because it will literally just fill the whole image with fog. This one kind of came out a little bit like Stranger Things, but fog machine's really cool if you're doing like character design because it's always going to have like, a character walking in the scene and there's fog everywhere. It adds a lot of cinematic views. And also if you just use fog machine, you can generate a lot of really nice fog that you can just overlay onto your image. Ambient occlusion. I know there are 3D people here that are going to be able to explain this 10 times better than I would. I know it makes really pretty values, so you got like really darks, really lights. This was supposed to be a pterodactyl. I don't know what it is, but I really like the shapes and I really like the texture. So like I would take that wing and I would lay it over something like a face, and I would get those veins and those values and stuff like that. The top right one, this one is using a whole like boatload of, a lot of the terms. Octane render, again, something 3D modelers are going to know a little bit better than me, but it really creates that really nice shape, looks very 3D with a blurred background. Spotlighting, vibrant, sci-fi. ArtStation, this is kind of like, it's going to pull all the images from ArtStation. So you're like, I really want it to focus on being like concept art or 3D modeling. Tell it to do ArtStation. Game art, I want it to focus on video games. Concept art, I want it to focus on art that represents visual. Creature design, same thing. Ambient occlusion, like what before, I want the values to be strong. I want the dynamic lighting, and I want it to be realistic. There's a whole bunch of them. You can write 4K, 8K, ultra realistic, HD. A lot of these things, you can really generate some really detailed images. The last part, the -- AR 9:16, that's aspect ratio. So that's why it's going to be taller. Portrait, you can change it up, 16:9. It works really well. You can do like 1:20 and it'll be like a really long line. I did it, I think, pretty drastically in one of the next frames. Yeah, this one. When you're generating in Midjourney, I try to focus on two of the buttons. So when you go and generate something, you type /imagine, and then you enter your keywords. So like I did a field of dinosaurs. I wanted it to be limited palette. I want it to be majestic, scenic, magical, dinosaurs, landscape, blah, blah, blah. But the aspect ratio is 16:5. I want it to be really stretched out. So like when I looked at this image, I felt like it didn't get the limited palette part, which is a bummer. Usually when you put the words in the front, it gives a little bit more importance to them. So sometimes it just doesn't work out. But I feel like the image came out really cool. So the two that I used was upscale to max. This one will just make the image big, make it high resolution. There's two other ones you could do: light upscale redo, beta upscale redo. A lot of people use these when they're trying to get final images. I'm trying to buy textures, I'm trying to create textures. And so a lot of that, like creating a final image, it's not as much going to give me a texture as much as it feels like I'm just pulling from a picture. Remaster, this one's a little funky. I don't know the details of it too much, but when you click remaster, it almost makes everything kind of feel like toys. But when you can really nail an image and get it to remaster, it smooths out a lot of the shapes, and it can make really beautiful images. Or it can make them look derpy as hell. Like you can see the dinosaur in the back with the big jaw, really weird looking. I don't know. Sometimes maybe you want that for your creature design. But the problem with remaster is it killed my aspect ratio. Like the aspect ratio is super wide. And then when I did remaster, it shrank it down to like an 11:8.5, it looks like. So that's kind of a little iffy. But if you're like, I really want it to redefine a lot of my shapes, make the clouds feel like more clouds, remaster is really fantastic like that. Oops. So going into now the images that I'm creating, these are a small pool of the images I used. I do have a time lapse at the end, a really quick one that will kind of go into showing like all the images I used. But pretty much the pictures that I have here, there's just like 4 or 5 variations of those same images, kind of just tweaking the textures a little bit, making different horns, making different environments. But you can kind of get the idea. I wanted a green glowing swamp. I wanted dragon horns, scales, a lot of that stuff. I found like some images like these like kind of panels and bulbous like shapes were really interesting. I kind of was like, oh, what happens if he was like a frog, like kind of bloated in the throat? So when that kind of came up, I was like, oh, that's something I could use. I'm going to like that. And so you can see where I utilized a lot of that. The image on the right is something that I would send as kind of like my first pass sketch. Generating the images took about an hour. Photobashing it took about an hour. So you can get a really defined sketch in about 2 hours of work when you're comfortable with it. When starting off, of course, you have to figure out a lot of the shapes and stuff like that. But you can create an image really quickly, and that's kind of like why this is really nice. You'll see when the final image that it looks a lot different because I don't want to rely on the textures. I don't want to rely on these images. I want to use them as a throwing paint on canvas, like I said before. I kind of use like 4 very varying tools, like kind of like presets, I guess, to implement a lot of these images. The first thing I do is I want to get the image in there. and I want to paint the texture in. So I'll lower the opacity of the image and I'll put it over. I'll have the shape drawn out, kind of how I want it. Maybe I'll have a texture already over it. And then what I do is I create a mask in the options, and then I fill it with black. You can use a paint bucket. In Procreate, you just drag it and fill the whole thing with black. It makes the image disappear. But that way, when I go in with a brush with a white, I can paint in the texture. So it gives me the opportunity to allow as much of the texture as I want. I don't want it to be too apparent in the top, but I really wanted to show where that like highest point of the stomach is. That's when I'll paint it in a little bit more. You can see like where it says layer mask, you can see a little bit of like the shape I created using that. When it comes to color, a lot of the time the colors are not going to match. The three that I typically use when I'm going with images is hue, saturation, brightness, color balance, and curves. I use all of them, but if I was to put a favorite, it would probably be the curves. You're allowed to be a lot more accurate. Color balance is really cool because it allows you, like, I really like the shadows being green, but I want the highlights to be yellow. You can go in, click highlights, and change that yellow, and you're not going to affect your shadows or your midtones. So that one is very accurate when it comes to like really figuring out your lighting. Curves, on the other hand, will like, you can create these shapes like using points, kind of a little bit like the pen tool of Photoshop and Illustrator. And you can like increase the red. You can go in with gamma, which is like your brightness and darkness, and you can like drop down the points to, you know, lower the brightness. If you're like, okay, everything is so bright, you can kill the brightness. It grays it out a little bit, but that's when you go in with a red, green, and blue and boost those up a little bit by making arches that go up or down. If you want to, like, let's say you want it to be a worm edge, you're going to drop it down for blue. Hue, saturation, brightness. This one is really nice. It's just really drastic. It's not as accurate. So like if you just grab the hue and move it to the right, you'll have like, oh, I want the chest to be green. But then suddenly like you had some like little bit of reds, a little bit of orange. You can see like there's a little bit of purples now in there, and I don't want the purples. So some of that, you know, you don't want it to be too drastic. Saturation and brightness, though, that's really nice, especially if you're wanting to boost the saturation. So what I would typically do is I would go in and find the color that I want using curves. And then I would go in with the hue and saturation, bump the saturation up. The brightness and stuff like that, I would handle in the curves. Color balance is very rare if I'm really trying to make a very strong spotlight color. But it is really useful. I've seen people who just rely on color balance, especially if you're using like a painterly style. It's cool to duplicate your entire like canvas and then like raise the color balance, like make everything feel a lot warmer, and then do the same thing that I did with the mask and paint in where you want the light to be. Really interesting stuff with color balance. The last two things that I do, so I mask in my shape, I figure out my colors. This is where I go in with layer options. Layer options, it's in Photoshop. I'm pretty sure it's in Clip Studio, Procreate. The two that I typically use is overlay and multiply, but you never know when something's going to look really good. On this example, I painted in with a white color on top of that, and I knew that it was going to make it more yellow, a little more green. It was going to saturate it and it's going to brighten it. And I really wanted this kind of like segments of glowing color. I wanted it to be like the venom is glowing inside of its throat. So I kind of painted in that white. You would do this multiple layers. You would use soft brushes and stuff to give it a little bit of glow. What's really cool is if you lay your texture over a flat image and you use like, let's say overlay or add or soft light or something, you can cycle through it and find where this texture just fits best. The layer option is really fantastic with that. I can tell you the details of what each of them do. I know overlay brightens and saturates. I know multiply darkens and saturates. There's others that do the opposite, but you never know when it's going to work. So like when I go and try laying a texture over a flat image or something like that, I'll actually cycle through all of them. Typically it's going to be overlay or multiple. The last thing is manipulating the image. There's the liquify tool. I use that on some occasions when I'm like trying to make like something that's a little too straight, kind of like have a curve to it, like if it's blowing in the wind. This though, I use warp and distort a lot. Distort it like takes a square and you can like put it as a plane at an angle, makes it look a little more 3D. So especially if you're like, I want to add a tattoo, you paint out your tattoo in 2D, you use the distort and you can make it at an angle, like taking a piece of paper, like taking it flat and then putting it at an angle like that. And then from there, I would go in with the warp and I would curve it around like a cylinder. And so that's kind of like what I did with the belly. It was already a round shape, but I wanted it to push it in a little more. Right now, it just felt like a tube, and I wanted it to feel more like a chest, like maybe there's a rib cage in there. So I pinched it in a little bit and pushed it back up. And so like those are like the 4 things I do with my images when I'm trying to implement textures and stuff like that. The most important thing is brushes. I also have compiled all my brushes together. So if we're wanting the download of that, I'm sure we can get that set up. Unfortunately, getting Photoshop brushes into Procreate, really easy. Getting Procreate brushes out is difficult. But if you have Procreate, you know, I do have these brushes. The only ones I didn't include are the Smoke and Sparks. Those are copyrighted brushes. I also have the links of those as well. Really nice to add like really simple effects. You got your signature round hard brushes. Those are in every single program. Procreate has a thing called Streamline, and it's really nice for me because I got a really shaky hand. Streamline makes your lines perfect, so I love that. Soft round, very normal airbrush kind of soft round. Chisel has a really thin line. It goes by the angle of how you're like looking at the screen. So like when you have your iPad and you're rotating and stuff like that, you can make like a really thin line, or it can make like a flat image, and that's really fun as well. Similar HB is similar to like the flat. These ones are going to be kind of like a rectangle. You draw it, it follows the shape of your brush. So like when you draw it, it's going to follow the path. HB is kind of like a pencil. There's the smudge. This one's really nice if you're wanting to add like texture or grime and stuff like that. Flat rough. This one has a little bit of texture. It's also the same as the flat, but it has a little bit of a grain, like a paper grain. The ones on the right are my effect brushes. Smoke, it's just the brushes are just a series of different kinds of smokes. Noise brush is really nice if you're wanting to give kind of a little bit of like maybe an Illustrator feel, making it feel like it's maybe a inkjet printer or something like that. Rust is really fantastic. You can see on the image on the right, like you can see it a lot in about like kind of that crown shape that's on the top. You can see it feels like old metal. Fairy dust is actually a brush that I made like from base. It's really cool. It feels like sparks or dust particles, but it feels a little more magical. It kind of scatters itself together. Smoke, clouds, pretty much. Electricity is another brush that it was originally supposed to be like water ripples, but I edited it in a way now it does crackling electricity, stuff like that. So like these are literally the only brushes I use when I paint. There may be some ones that I add really like for specific projects, like I have pixel brushes and stuff. But like generally like this image, I just created it. It uses all the brushes that I have, except I think I didn't use the fairy dust as much. You can see a little bit on the bottom. But so with the brushes, that's when I have like the shapes I want. That's when I'll go in and paint, figure out my colors. I kind of was like my own client with this piece. So I was like, I just feel like he's kind of blending in with the shape. I want to push him forward. I want there to be a lot more gold. I want it to be like a corrupted gold dragon. So I added a lot of yellows and greens. This is not what I would say is my final. I would probably spend another like 5 to 10 hours painting on top of it to create a final image. But this is something that I can send to a client, and something that would be like probably take me like 20 to 30 hours to paint just by hand, like thinking about it, gathering images and just starting from sketch. I was able to do in a quarter of the time. And that's why like I like AI, because it's not just pulling up pictures and going into textures.com or going on Pinterest and trying to find pictures and trying to avoid copyright as much. Because you know, AI is trying to dodge copyright as much as possible, and I'm trying to dodge AI as much as possible. So it kind of really allows me to be a little more unique and allows me to create really interesting shapes. And for this last frame, I just kind of wanted to show you the time lapse of it. It's a really grainy image because getting it to work on the presentation wasn't as great. But it can kind of show a lot of it. If you don't like flashing images, the beginning of it shows a lot of the pictures that I uploaded them. So it kind of like flashes those first few images, but it's not too bad. I'll just watch that for 30 seconds. Yeah, so I liked that tree shape a lot. So I cut that out, duplicated it, combined them together. I knew I wanted a rock in the center. I wanted there to be liquid. And so a lot of that photo bashing. You can see like the clouds. And this is where I started like my paint over, really started defining like the effects, the glow, saturating, everything like that. And yeah, just pretty quick. But other than that, really simple process. It's a lot of fun, especially because AI when it first came out, it was really terrifying. But now that I see it, I get really inspired. Like I can see a lot of images, like, but I don't like seeing like the finished products. I like seeing the weirdness that comes from Midjourney. I like the bodies that are all contorted and funky because then I can really like kit bash them into my own little thing. A lot of fun. But yeah, that's pretty much a lot of my process. I think we have some time. If anyone wants to ask any questions, you can also do the meeting room 2 chat. There's a lot of questions that could be asked about AI and stuff like that. But it really is a nice tool. I feel like it does need a little bit of regulation, especially the programs that are not the popular ones, the one that like random people are creating. There's definitely going to have to be a lot of regulation on that side. But I think that we have a lot of control over what the AI generates, and there's means of doing it. They just really don't tell you the means of making sure that your stuff isn't being taken, making sure that your voice is still out there. There is a lot of ways to do it. And, I want to be ahead of the AI game. I don't want it to be like this thing where I'm fighting against it. So I'm trying to utilize it as much as possible, but I'm trying to also keep it very simple, and not try to make a final image. I'm not relying on the AI as much as I'm holding hands with it while drawing, pretty much.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Reese. That's really, really cool. We've got about 5 minutes, so if you have any questions, please drop them into the meeting room chat. I see Max is typing already. And then we'll get Reese to answer those in the next 5 minutes. And thank you, everybody, for coming. It's been awesome. Thank you, Reese.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for giving me the time. I really do get excited about this. So I think I appreciate the fact that I've been able to kind of share it, especially because some people don't get a chance to actually talk about it, see artists that utilize it too much.
Yeah.
So it's cool to share it.
Here's a question from Max. Do you find good variety in what it produces? Wondering if someone was to type your exact keywords, would they get your references?
No and yes. It's going to pull from, typically if you're using like very little keywords, it's going to pull from what's most popular. So you will get a lot of shapes. Like, especially I find that I can actually see a lot of similar imagery going in when I'm using completely different keywords. But if you were to take my exact keywords and put it in, you're going to get completely different pictures. You may get similar colors, especially if you're like Jurassic Park. You're going to get all the colors they use in Jurassic Park, which, is all going to be like those greens, orange, and blues. But you should get, majority of it is going to be completely different images, but you will see some likeness, but you're not going to get my exact image. Like there was this really like beautiful portrait someone did of like an elf queen. I took the exact keywords and put it in, and it came out as a guy. And I was like, it says queen, so sometimes it's really like it still needs to figure itself out.
Yeah. Another question here. Do you ever use the same keywords multiple times or always switch it around every generation?
I try to switch it all the time, but I try to keep the keywords, especially if I'm going to go with a specific piece. I really want to keep like certain keywords, like things that deal with the atmosphere, like fog machine and everything like that. I'm going to make sure to keep a lot of those keywords because it's going to keep the atmosphere the same. So like if I'm trying to pull scales and I want it to be realistic, I'm going to make sure that I want every image that I put in to be realistic. So I don't get like cartoon images or something like that. But typically you can go in with completely different keywords and pull from all the stuff, especially if you do a lot of color changing and manipulation of the images. It doesn't really matter too much. But if I'm doing textures, I try to keep the HD realistic aspect ratio. Like aspect ratio is really important too, because if you're like have a landscape painting, it's going to focus on environments. But if you do a portrait painting, it's going to focus more on characters and stuff like that, because that's typically how artists present their artwork, with like golden ratio and stuff like that. So you're going to get a lot of like those final images. Like if you're like, I want to do a character design and you do a landscape, it's going to be a little weird. So some of those things I try to keep in mind, but most of the time, a lot of the keywords are all going to be different.
Sergio is asking, where can you find more keywords examples?
I mean, they're all over Google. There's some really fantastic YouTube videos of people who are like really recommending some keywords, but my actual recommendation is, instead of following what everybody's doing, I think I actually have it right here. James Gurney, Color and Light. really fantastic book. It's sectioned in chapters, so you'll actually get like monochromatic schemes, gamut mapping, edges and depth. So like it has a lot of keywords that use a lot of like lighting terms that they use in photography and stuff like this. Because James Gurney, he photographs his work, so he really focuses on the terminology and stuff like that. So finding books that talk about it, like I would really recommend getting like photography books and find where they use like a lot of those scientific terms for something, and finding it off that. So books are really fantastic for it. You can get it off, popular YouTubers, popular like things like that, but you're going to end up in that whole everything looks the same kind of thing when everybody's using the same keywords. Like I use ArtStation for that one. I think every single piece I've seen in the top like hundreds on Midjourney all use ArtStation or James Jean. Everybody uses James. It's so like I try to find keywords outside that. But yeah, photography terms, those are the best ones. Or 3D modeling terms, those are really good too. Hannah also said something too. I would totally be down to do a blog post about it.
Got a couple more people typing. Let's just get those questions in. Hannah, very excited that you're going to do a blog.
Yeah, I would totally be down. I might need a little guidance on what I should do for that though. But yeah, I would love to do that. That'd be really fun. Yeah, more creative words, the better it's going to come out. But I also try to avoid too much words. Once you start adding a lot of words, it's going to start creating a lot of final images. It's hard to get, I like kind of that, what is that, Rorschach feeling of like finding images where they're not supposed to be, like that tree that I made there is actually like a branch, so I like to do that. So sometimes making it a lot more simple is actually nice. But if you're wanting final image, more keywords, better image.
Yeah. One last question here. Sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I'm just waiting for Fernando and Max to finish typing. We'll call those the last questions. Cool. And then we'll let you off the hot seat.
Yeah. Also, if you want Procreate brushes, just ping me.
Yeah, we'll get this loaded onto the MLC asset library for anyone who wants to. Awesome. Max just saying thank you for the amazing kickoff lunch and learn. Thanks guys for organizing. 100% Max.
Yeah, I appreciate everybody coming in. Yeah. Awesome. I think that was everybody's questions. Yeah, seems like it.
Yeah, seems like that.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks. Awesome. I appreciate you letting me talk. Sorry if I rambled too much. And sorry if you saw cats freaking out.
No, the cats are part of the MLC way. Gotta have pets in the background.
Well, I was worried because I have a tripod and it's really precarious, and I have 3 cats, and that's just asking for bad news.
100%. Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you so much, Reese, for getting that ready. Really exciting to see how you put those together, and look forward to seeing everybody at the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Reese.
Bye.